intuition. It is our route back to our source, back home. It is the channel inside us, a stream inside us, or a pathway or an avenue. And the more we walk it, the more we trust it, the wider it gets and the clearer it becomes. We are coming to a time of synthesis. Our science, the world itself, is seeing itself as one. We're kind of preparing for a different age, I think, a different epoch. It's a very rich time. We've got to bring the spiritual teaching down into the form. We've got to bring it into the earth, into the way we treat each other and the earth itself, and into our communities.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of The Future is Beautiful. It is an exciting day today, as this is the launch day here in the UK and Australia of my new book, Intuition. Access your inner wisdom, trust your instincts, find your path. It officially comes out in the US and Canada in January. As many of you know, I was only approached with the offer to write this book last November, and the whole project came through very quickly. I am so grateful to the team at DK Books for everything they did to make this project as smooth and wonderful to be part of as possible, despite the circumstances of this year being unprecedented. I wrote most of the book in Tillier Treehouse at West Lexham in Norfolk during lockdown, and then was finishing the book as my father was dying, which, as you know, was a very sudden thing that happened this summer. It went to print just a week after he passed, and so I was by his bedside whilst editing the printouts as things were going to be Americanized and going into print. Part of what is in the book has come from that liminal space, as well as from, the quietness of that time in the treehouse, that time of tuning out of all of the usual distractions and having that opportunity to go really deep into myself, to feel what is it that would serve at this time to be offered. This week, I received a copy of this beautiful hardback book, and I am so happy to be sharing this with you. For me, the theme of intuition is really a key to what we need to unlock. We must not waste more time doubting this aspect of us, but invite it fully into our culture. The book is laid out into 9 principles and 53 practices. My guest today said of the book, "This is a wonderful little book. It is also way more than a simple book on intuition. It distills the essential elements for living a truly beautiful, peaceful life. Every page has a potent insight, a powerful exercise, or a profound contemplation. Simple, sweet, practical, and elegant. I recommend it highly." This book came from a very, very deep place in me, as I said, and from many deep and powerful experiences. And I offer it with the spirit of this turning time and the importance of reclaiming our intelligence that is greater than the rational mind. This world needs us fully alive, embodied, and able to listen. I dedicated the book to my father, Himanshu, the full moon that illuminates my night sky, to his memory. And it makes perfect sense that it would be launching days after this full moon eclipse, and right as we approach the solstice and the end of 2020. I found myself in tears on Monday morning as I was realizing that my father wouldn't hold this book in his hands, and so much of this journey has been inspired by him as a Jungian analyst, as somebody that believed so deeply in his own intuition and the importance of our intuition. And then on Tuesday, when the books arrived, I found myself dancing, grinning ear to ear in celebration and joy of having written this book, but also really that this is the time for this book, and that this is a time that intuition isn't part of some spiritual, weird woo-woo-ness, but it's really just about understanding who we are. It really excites me that this is something that is coming more and more into our dominant culture, that's coming more and more into presence in our world, because we really need to honor and understand this part of ourselves. I really believe that so much of the wisdom that we need to navigate this shifting of paradigms is there. It's already here. It's in our intuition. It's in that untapped potential. And so I wonder what's possible when each of us really opens into that expansive nature of our intuition and into that innate wisdom. I wonder then what's possible here. So that's partly what the dance is about, like how extraordinary that something that has been pushed down and shamed and sidelined in ways that have been very harmful. People have died all over the world throughout history for believing in their intuition, for believing in the unseen. It really fills me with a lot of joy that this is no longer something that we have to hide, that it's something that we can be in openness about and explore more deeply, unleash and awaken the potentiality of this wisdom that we all hold. I would love to dance with you, as always. I'm hosting a launch party for the book for all who wish to come and celebrate with me this Sunday. It's going to be in our Temple of Zoom, and I have some surprise guests and musical performances planned. You can find the invitation for this, along with other gifts, for those who pre-order the book or purchase the book at www.amisha.co.uk/intuition. I would absolutely love for you to come and celebrate with me this weekend. I recorded a special and more personal chapter for the audiobook edition called Playing in the Wild Fields of Trust. And I'm including this chapter written out for those who register for the launch. And if you can't make the launch in person, if you have time zone issues or time clashes, you can still register for the launch and we'll send you the replay the next day so you can join in that way. And for those of you that are in the UK and Australia, or who want to purchase through bookshops based in those countries, please do consider this as a gift for those in your life over the holidays. And for those of you in the US and Canada, please keep pre-ordering the book, as it really supports authors this way. And especially, this is a time to be supporting authors of colour. The pre-orders determine where the book will be stocked and other important possibilities. So if this is a book that you at one stage want to buy, I really encourage you to buy it now, because it gives the most potential life to this book and to the wisdom that is inside of it, that we want to be awakened in so many. And thank you for being on this journey with me. This podcast and this community has brought so much courage, inspiration, and joy into my life. It has opened up so many doors internally and in the world. I appreciate you so much for this. I really appreciate what this is. And as you know, for me, this is more than a podcast. It's not media. It's something that is far more extraordinary than that has the ability to open up that connection to our souls and to shift what's possible here on this beautiful planet Earth. My guest this week is Richard Rudd, an international spiritual teacher, writer, and award-winning poet. His mystical journey began early in life when he experienced a life-changing state of spiritual illumination over 3 days and nights in his 20s. This catalyzed an extensive worldwide spiritual search. All his studies became synthesized in 2002 when he began to write and receive the gene keys, a vast synthesis exploring the miraculous possibilities inherent in human DNA. It took 7 years to write the book, as well as understand and embody its teachings. Today, Richard continues to teach and travel all over the world, applying the gene keys across many fields, from the practical to the mystical. Attracting a wide audience, his works have been translated into many languages. In 2019, Richard was named on the Watkins list of the 100 most spiritually influential living people. To give you an idea of the accuracy of the gene keys, I want to share with you my gene key for my life's work, what I'm here to do. As you know me and the intentions behind this podcast and The Future is Beautiful, this will be interesting for you to hear and perhaps give you a nudge to go and do your readings on the gene keys. I only read this perhaps a couple of years ago, way after I'd started this project. Gene Key 37. Because of the current dramatic shift in the world social climate, this can be a very challenging and exciting time for someone like you. You will have to keep letting go of the traditional views of family, marriage, business, and social structures. Through you, a new vision of community wants to come into the world. This means that you must work deep within the community, even though you may sometimes feel limited by its outmoded ways. Your job is to be ahead of your time, to be a leader and visionary, bringing new social values and ideas into people's lives. Like a good parent, you will have to be very patient and caring with those whom you seek to transform. If you give them enough time and never compromise your own vision, they will eventually come around to your way of thinking. Your way is the way of the future, the way of equal rights for all human beings. You're a champion of both the group and the individual, because you see that in the end, they are one and the same. Gives me goosebumps reading that. And for this interview, Richard and I were actually in the same physical location, but due to COVID restrictions and shielding, we did the interview separately on Zoom from different buildings. And it was a gloriously sunny day in Devon, and the sun was coming through the window and making these beautiful shapes actually for both of us on the screens on Zoom. Yeah, I just want to share that with you because it really felt very special. In this conversation called The Age of Synthesis, we explore the themes of intuition, mystery school, and collective wisdom as we contemplate the question, how do we become spiritual anchors amidst the sea of change? I hope that this conversation inspires you and widens that pathway within yourself of your own intuition and your own understanding of what is possible in this time. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. I am absolutely delighted, Richard, to welcome you to The Future is Beautiful. As it happens, I was talking to one of my dear friends this morning, and I just said that I was about to interview you today. And he said, "Oh, I woke up listening to some of your words this morning." And so that feels like a really nice bit of synchronicity. Yeah, this power of what the gene keys can offer us. I have written about the gene keys in my book Intuition, and also really recommend it to people on the beautiful leadership immersion, because I find that having maps that help us to understand more about the less visible aspects of who we are, or the parts of us that we haven't really been taught about or kind of encouraged to discover, perhaps, in some of the more conditioned societal patterning that we live within. I find it to be so powerful, because when we have that information, it allows us to really live in a way that serves the highest in us, and then the impacts that has in how we co-create in terms of the world that we live in. I wonder if you can share with us a little bit around how you had the balls, the courage to put something like this out there, to believe in it so much. Because, so many of us have a strong relationship with our intuition and with that ability to bring information into this world that perhaps hasn't been laid out before us. And so many don't. It's also quite a thing to trust in something enough to invite others in.
Yeah, thank you. For me, it was a series of turning points in life that occur to many of us. I think one of my turning points was probably when I was 19 years old, and I bought one of those round the world tickets, and I set off with a group of friends, went to the Americas and then across the Pacific to Australia. After a while of being together with these friends, I kind of started to grow a bit tired of being with them, and because there was not that there was anything wrong with them, but there was a kind of trail that was laid out where travelers go, and I kind of picked up on that, and I just thought, I don't want this trail. You would follow the trail, and you would go to those certain places. There were beautiful places and magical places, and you would meet the same people often further on down the road. And after a while, I just thought, I want to go off the trail. And so I just said goodbye to them, and I set off, on my own in the opposite direction. And I think that's what began my initiation. And it was, it was a little bit daunting, because I hadn't ever done anything like that. I was in foreign place. I started in Australia, and then I ended up in Indonesia, and I just followed my intuition and kept going. And it was really adventurous. I felt like a kind of early adventurer where, I just followed that intuitive calling of literally getting to an airport and then looking at the board and going, well, I'm going to go there. And then finding a way to get there. And then I started to meet people, and I started to meet different people. I started to meet more local people. I started to meet kind of wilder travelers who also weren't following the kind of prescribed routes with the youth hostels and things like that. Because I'd just go off the beaten track for as far as I could. And that's where you meet really interesting people. And that's where you meet locals. I had some amazing experiences. Like an example of an experience that always resounds in my memory is, this is when I was in Guatemala, and I was high in the mountains. I'd had to get there by a bus that went there once a week or something. And I got it wasn't even a bus, it was a truck. And I got on this truck and drove however many hours, like 18 hours, to this remote area in the mountains. And then there was this little mountain village, and there's certainly no hotels or anything there. And I was so enthused that my intuition had brought me to this magical place. And I remember this little villagey kind of square. It wasn't really a square, it was just a sort of opening, and then there were lots of little old houses and huts, and there I was, just there with my little backpack and not a lot. And I go, what now? And I saw some children. I heard children, and they were looking through kind of cracks at me. They were watching this strange white guy, and they were watching me. And And so I kind of opened my backpack. I took out like a towel and I put it over my head and I started playing the fool. I started just like tripping up and falling over and they were giggling and giggling. And then more came and then they all came out and we started to play games and they were Indian people. So they didn't speak even Spanish. They spoke like a language called Kachikel, which is like an Indian language I didn't know at all. But anyway, I ended up being invited into their homes and sitting with these beautiful Indian local people. And I stayed there for some time, just hanging with them. That was an example of just following the intuition and realizing that grace was laying out this feast of experiences wherever I went. I mean, some of the things that happened to me were extraordinary. And ended up working on a film set on the Great Barrier Reef because of a guy I met on a beach that turned out to be a diplomat who had these connections. And anyway, my life was just sort of magical. And I realized that if you're open to things and you take the risk, then the doors open. So I think in that year or so, I kind of broke through into another realm of realizing life is magical. A little bit of courage and a little bit of stretching and a little bit of off the beaten track, it opens up so much. And then I spent a lot of my 20s also traveling the world and then coming back to the UK and then going off again and doing all kinds of things. And spirituality was part of that journey. I really encourage anyone listening to this, if you're younger and you want to open up your horizons, to, do something like that. Go off without a plan. Go alone. You have to be alone. Obviously, follow your intuition and be safe. Don't be crazy. But, you got to take some risks and then amazing things happen.
And it doesn't even need to be going far, right? We can go on wild adventures close to wherever we are.
Absolutely. Just open to people. When you see someone coming opposite way from you, or just say hello. It's amazing like how simple that is. And maybe pause and see if, a conversation wants to develop or a dialogue. And you'll know if it does because it'll just happen. In a way, all human beings have that deep in their DNA, some kind of friendliness, some sense of hosting. Wherever I've gone in the world, even locally, there's always this sense that if you give people the opportunity, they'll open the doors for you. One of the things I wanted to do, and I still haven't, and because I then had a family, was I was going to walk all around Britain. I wanted to walk everywhere. I wanted to not get in a car. I just wanted to walk across the landscape. And then I had a family and things changed. But maybe someone else can do that for me. just set out. And instead of going down the roads and paths, maybe cut across some fields and, see what happens. Go off the beaten track. And I mean this mystically and allegorically as well as literally.
So for you, this openness and this trust in your intuition has been something that's been with you right from your early 20s, your teen years.
Yeah.
You never had to have a kind of battle with it.
Well, you make mistakes, don't you? Where you don't listen to your intuition and then you learn. And that's also part of the journey. It does not, sometimes your intuition leads you somewhere that it ends up as a dead end. And it was right, but it also led to pain or suffering. But it was a journey that was the right journey to take. And then you have the times where you don't follow your intuition and then you learn also whatever you learn.
Literal dead ends where you go into death and rebirth because of that path.
So there's no right and wrong. There's just learning. And I'm really glad you've written a book on intuition because it is our route back to our source, back home, and it's a channel inside us. It's like, I always see it's like a stream inside us or a pathway or an avenue. And the more we walk it, the more we trust it, the wider it gets and the clearer it becomes, the less risky, because sometimes the intuition has to take risks because it goes against logic. or reason. You're offered an opportunity, but your intuition says no. And your mind is going, no, don't be crazy. You shouldn't say no to this. But your intuition sometimes does that. It's just about as much about saying no as it is about saying yes. And it's such a powerful thing to kind of know that pathway inside yourself. And the other thing, I guess, about intuition is it's sometimes very quiet. It whispers things very quietly. And sometimes it only whispers it once. And if you're not listening and paying attention, you might miss it because the mind is very noisy. And there's this little quiet whisper that just goes, go down that way. And the mind's going, no, I think you should go this way because then that will lead to that. And that will probably lead to that. And then you can have that.
And you don't want to be late and you've got to do this. And it's like all of these things.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a magical thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I feel in my own journey, being asked to write the book was quite something. I had that wait, can I write this book? Do I know enough about this? And I don't know if it's about being a woman, if it's about being Indian, but I had a lot of conditioned fear to push through in order to actually be able to say this isn't woo-woo and this isn't weird. This is just a part of every single human being. And it's actually crazy that we pretend it's not and that we make it into being this thing that is strange when it's incredible intelligence. We're using it all the time anyway. And I feel really excited about what could happen if, as humans, we open up to it more and it becomes really normal and accepted to live with that full intelligence that is so much more sophisticated than what our minds can come up with. And for me, I feel like it's the skill of this time that we need to cultivate. It's where all that potentiality is, whatever problems we are facing as humanity or in our own lives. If we can tap into that stream, I really love that visual that you just gave us and really have it clear, flowing and open. I feel like, we know what to do for all of it. Yeah, so it feels like a really interesting, timely and important aspect of ourselves to be talking about at this time.
It's also really connects you into your body, which is the one thing that people in the modern world do less, because we have so many things, pressures and responsibilities and dreams that we're trying to attain or whatever, and sometimes struggles. For coming into your intuition, it means to be really deep in your body and into physical awareness of the body, because that intuition rises up from within the body. And so it is about being embodied, living in the moment, living in the present moment. And you can live in the present moment and still have a very active, interesting mind. You've got to have that integration and that balance of deep resting in, I call it resting in the belly. And a lot of my teaching is based on bringing one's awareness into the belly and really healing our relationship with the belly, which traditionally is where intuition kind of arises from. I think it's actually more, I think it's everywhere. But I think when you're in the belly, when you're in the core of your being, the gut, then it's also you're in every cell of the body at the same time. Because if you're in the center, then you're in the center of every cell. There's something about that intuition that we call it our gut response, or it's deep in us, in that lower dantian, as they call it, or the lower part of our being, where we have as you said, we have a very powerful developing intelligence. In a way, supersedes the brain, and the brain is incredible, but it's called the second brain or the abdominal brain. In many ways, it's the first brain, actually. The intelligence in there is extraordinary. And I would say in the process of developing or awakening, a new possibility in us. You talk about the future being beautiful, and I think a lot of it is to do with the development of that part of our being.
Thank you. Yeah. just feeling that in my body. And when I feel that in my body, all of the fear that we're being sold about the future and our lives, it just disappears, because when I really like connect to that space in my body, I understand why I'm here. You know, there's that connection that's just so much deeper and more powerful than a lot of the place in which most of our society is constructed from.
Yeah, absolutely. There's true stability in our being. You know, that's where it lies. And when a person finds that inside themselves, they become like an anchor. They become like a really sort of powerful rock amidst the sea of changing frequencies of the world. You know, it doesn't mean that you're not perfect and you don't have your kind of moments, but you always come back to this. The more you're anchored there, the more reliable you are in a way, because life can kind of work through you, can sing out through you. It can choose through you, and it can choose what it wants instead of what you think you want. And I think there's that. So it's a process of deep surrender. It's mysterious, isn't it? The surrender to the intuition, because you're surrendering to the unknown and the unknowable, and you're surrendering to the mystery of something else greater than you choosing through you. I love that. That requires a kind of real adventurer inside us to step up.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you open yourself to a life of being surprised and delighted by what happens, because you're not controlling it from that place of perceived certainty.
It makes for a much more relaxing life. I think it also unlocks our joy. You know, there's an enormous amount of joy hidden in the human body. That's what I found in my travels. Like, if you go out amongst simple folk, you know, in the world who are living more hand to mouth sustenance, and I'm not glamorizing the poor people, poverty at all. But I've found this to be true. When you're around people who are living simply, they have this joy in them that comes from that simplicity, or maybe it comes from the edge that they're living on. And if you dig a bit deeper, for sure, there are concerns and there are worries and there are anxieties, just like everyone else. But there's this sort of, with simplicity comes more joy in a way. The road to simplicity is actually, it moves through complexity, you know, for many of us, because we have to dismantle the complexity that we've created in our life through our decisions, through not making intuitive-based decisions. And that what happens, that tends to happen, is that we then create a more and more complicated life around us that is more draining and more, you know, it's like the accumulation of wealth. People that accumulate more and more wealth, and I'm not speaking out against that as well, because I don't have a judgment on those things. What it often does is it makes your life more and more complex, and it creates more and more responsibilities. It's harder to enjoy it. So you then look at someone who doesn't have very much, and they might well be a lot happier than you. But we have to learn these lessons. You know, many of us have to go through that process, come out the other side, and realize that.
That's part of embodiment, right? That you have to experience it in your own body. There are things that you can learn from others around you and from books, but yeah, you have to experience things.
Definitely.
And not be afraid to make what are seen as mistakes, or to go down those dead ends, and to really be able to honor those cycles of how we learn and how we evolve. And yeah, as we descend into like a death place, that we're then able to emerge with something else that we've learned, some kind of treasure.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about the gene keys and how that came through for you?
Yeah. Well, it's a long story, but I can make it very simple. It's been like the assembling of a great kind of cosmic jigsaw puzzle. When I was younger, in my late 20s, I was given the first pieces of the puzzle, maybe the four corners or something, you know. They felt that time, you know, I had a real empowerment. I had a kind of an experience of other dimensions that was a spontaneous experience. And I knew what I was given, but I didn't know what to do with it. If you're given the four corners of a jigsaw puzzle, what do? You haven't got the other pieces, and they don't make sense, but you can see that they're like the pillars, and you can feel like, wow, this is powerful. So I had this experience that gave me a reference point for something. And then I started to live my life. I carried on living my life, and pieces came to me one by one. Other pieces came, experiences, things I learned, people I met, the things they knew, teachers, teachings. As I followed my intuition, following this spiritual path, this serpentine path, that for me led into all kinds of places, including fatherhood and marriage and responsibilities and all of that. But it also led me around the world and to lots of other, amazing experiences, and to assemble a body of teachings. And it led to kind of other things like betrayals and kind of forgivings and a lot of very human experiences that we all, one way or another, experience, deaths and births and stuff, human stuff. But everything for me was a piece of the puzzle because I had these four corners. So I started to assemble, but every now and again, bits of the puzzle would come together, a whole section would come together. And I go, wow, I wonder where that fits. And then another bit would be given. And then suddenly, every now and again, a bridging piece would come, an experience where like 2 or 3 whole pieces of the puzzle would just suddenly fit together. And I started assembling this body of teachings, this wisdom that was grown out of my experiences with studying I Ching and the things from all the many mystical systems I'd explored and deep contemplations. And then it started to form this thing. And I started to write this book, The Gene Keys, which was a deep contemplation of the pieces of the puzzle in a way, the 64 pieces. And then out of that, after I'd written that book and it found a publisher for itself, it kind of started. And it was like your first question you asked, like what like opening up to letting other people into your inner world was quite a moment. What will people think of this? Will it have a resonance? Does it have, I had the sense, having written the book, because that was the foundational piece, which was like a big centerpiece of the puzzle, if you like. I kind of had the sense that this was a powerful body of work. Well, it was a bit more than a sense, I knew it. And I kind of had the feeling this was going to have its own life, but I had no idea what that would be. But slowly, pieces of the puzzle keep coming. And as I said, some of them are people. Some of those people allow the teachings to come together in specific ways so that 3 or 4 different things that really fit and then can be shared. So it's not a one-person puzzle. It's a collective puzzle. I call it a synarchy. The synarchy is a wonderful Gene Keys word. There are lots of Gene Keys words that don't have ordinary meanings, so you can kind of really contemplate them. Synarchy is the self-organizing capacity of a group of people to come together, and they come together with a synthesis. And the synthesis is the teaching. The teaching requires many views and many different experiences and people to bring it together. So the synarchy and the synthesis kind of live together, and there's a great mystery in the unraveling of a collective wisdom like this. So it's been very mysterious, and it continues. And I'm still putting together pieces of the puzzle every day, working on several pieces at once, as you often do, because you're kind of working through the areas, and you have unfinished pieces over there, and then you have pieces where you've finished, but then how do you fit that? And it's a labyrinthine wisdom, but it's a joy. It's a joy to have a purpose and to be sharing that with many others, and to be doing good in the world in various ways. I have no real idea the extent of that, because it's hard to quantify. I don't always get feedback. I'm not that kind of a teacher who's out touring the world. I never have been that kind of a person. I tour the world, but I'm not a kind of public figure teacher. I'm more of a sort of I don't know, I'm a family man, I'm a father, I'm a local person. I kind of have my friends, and I love making new friends and spiritual friends, but I'm a much closer up. I'm not a kind of I'm here for the world. I'm more of a small groups, where I can see people, touch them, look in their eyes, and kind of feel the connection between us, the joy of that, and to get to know them a bit. That's always been my way to be. There are other people who have different sets of gifts and skills, but that just happens to be mine. So yeah, I think it's a beautiful ongoing process. It's a magical mystery drama. It has its ups and downs, like anything, it has its challenges. I've made many great friends, spiritual friends, along the way.
Hello. We're taking a short pause from the conversation. On behalf of our team and our community, thank you for being here and co-creating The Future is Beautiful. Much dedication, love, and time goes into the production of this show. We believe in being advertising free in a world that's always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. And so we make this show with you and for you, thanks to your support. There are 3 ways you can be more involved, so we can share the vision, wisdom, and creativity here as we explore what it means to be a human in this time. You can support the podcast by sharing it with your friends, posting episodes on social media, and doing iTunes reviews. You can support as a patron by making a monthly or one-off donation of your choice. And with this, you join the global patrons group and monthly video calls where we share connection and insight. You get to know the other amazing patrons from around the world, their stories and their work, and you offer direct support to me and the team, as well as being brought into the behind the scenes of creating something like this. It sounds like a lot, but it's as much or as little as you want to get involved in. You can become a member of Presence, our membership collective of care and practice, where we explore how to embody the themes of the podcast with workshops, calls, special events, tree whispers, and powerful tools, practices, and rituals that you can bring into your life. This is open to absolutely everybody as we create an inclusive and diverse space that celebrates well-being as a human right, where we explore together what it means to be creative, courageous, and connected to ourselves, each other, and the earth. This is about embodying sacred activism. We love meeting patrons and Presence members, and how being part in this way weaves our lives together, as well as making this show possible. If anything from this conversation has moved or inspired you, please get more involved. All information can be found at www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community. This show really can't go on without your patronage and Presence membership, so please do make it happen. And now, back to the conversation. A question that I have, and it's in a way like a little bit perhaps controversial because I don't know enough of the story, but I know that you were involved with human design before this. I'm not really interested in like the drama. I think the drama is always, these things happen and there's drama in any kind of, as relationships change, right? That's often the way, and especially in communities. What I'm interested in is that when you're in a space of perhaps somebody else's teachings, and then you might feel like there's information that you're getting, I guess it's a question of courage again. Where does that courage come from to say, actually, this is my path? And I ask that because I see a lot of people get stuck. This is something that me and my friends have discussed in different ways, of when you can get stuck and then you don't want to, you might be hearing something else and you don't quite know how to how gracefully to move away and to trust.
Yeah, it was a really interesting time for me because I went very deep into human design, and I'd followed my intuition, and it led me to the founder of that system, a man called Ra Uru, who was a wonderful man, an extraordinary, weird man as well. And I kind of got to know him quite well and became a student of his. And yet, as I went deeper into that system and started to teach it and share it when I came back to the UK, the decision, it became more and more uncomfortable in me. even though I was doing it and sharing it, there were bits of the language and there were bits of his philosophy and his way of describing things that felt uncomfortable. And not just that, but also some of the people that gathered around him I didn't feel comfortable with. It was a visceral thing. You either feel that or you don't. And there was a sort of, there were some energies in there that I remember one day just feeling like, God, I've got myself into a dogma and I'm even propagating it. And yet it felt correct. So I had to kind of grow out of it. I witnessed myself in that position. Something in me was so uncomfortable, it started to just sort of expand beyond the confines of the structure and the language and the system. And I started to tinker with it and play with it and expand my concepts around it. And I felt the joy of that, but I also felt the kind of worry of, that isn't what they're all saying. And I was part of this community of really lovely people. Many of them were really lovely people. And I felt a part of it and connected to this group of human designs, explorers. And it was a very revolutionary system in itself, still is in some ways. And this very kind of Saturnian teacher at the core, like a dark figure that wore black and was really kind of like absolutely certain of everything he said, could not be doubted in any way, but had this presence and charisma that was captivating. It was this figure, this dark figure. I had to come to meet that dark figure inside myself, the teacher, and risk losing it, risk going beyond it. Another spiritual experience came my way and it opened me up to higher possibilities and it gave me the courage to make that shift. And then I realized I had to leave that community and leave that system and leave that teacher. And I didn't want to do it in an underhand way. I'd seen many people go the same way before me, and I'd seen a lot of kind of drama and unpleasantness and legal problems and all that. And so I just was determined to leave graciously. So everything he'd given me, the rights of the UK and all that stuff, I just gave it back to him whole with all the work I'd done. I said, it's like, I'm not selling anything here. You gave it to me for free. I'm giving it back to you for free. Here it is, all of it. And I went to see him. I had to go and see him, and it wasn't an easy meeting, and like to share that with him. And I gave it back to him and said, I'm moving on. He was gracious to a point, but he was also kind of disappointed. I think he knew it was coming, but he was disappointed in me. So I had to kind of have that fatherly disappointment energy. But, I got over it. I was like, I've made the decision. I'm free now. And I was free to develop in my own direction. And that then became Gene Keys, and it grew and grew and grew. But it was a definite initiation. You have to meet those figures in life sometimes, those external figures of inner archetypes. And then you have to kind of go through that process of transcendence. It must have been how Jung felt with Freud. And there were so many examples littered in history of like, how do you leave that because you've had a bigger vision? And then you have all the disapproval of all the other people who are connected. So you have to kind of weather that as well and start again. But I guess that was the adventure in me. I'm going to start again, just from my beginning, with my building blocks. Still, I think there's still people in that community that disapprove of me. I don't have anything to do with them, but I think they exist.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up the Freud and Jung example, because my dad was a Jungian analyst. So I grew up with that story as a very prominent kind of mythology, if you like, of the breakdown that Jung went through when he realized that he needed to break away, when he realized that something was missing for him from those teachings. And so that's something that it's always been just a very strong story in my life through that relationship. With it, the acknowledgement that it's not easy to leave teachers, relationships, friendships, places, all of these things. But when we really are in that place of deep listening and deep connection with our intuition, we sometimes know that we have to. And it can't always be done neatly. And even sometimes it might be neat for a while, and then some rage will emerge later, or some extra layers of disappointment, or whatever it is. And that's kind of part of our entanglement that we have here as humans.
Absolutely. I was lucky because I used everything that happened and every energy that I met through that period as inspiration for the Gene Keys. That's how I wrote all the shadow stuff around the shadows of the Gene Keys, because sometimes I'd see it clearly in others and sometimes I'd experience it in myself as a reaction to powerful energies. And I'm grateful to all the characters in that little novella of my life who played these different roles, because they were my inspiration for the Gene Keys. Little do they know it. And I don't see it as they're just energies. These are energies that come and play through people for periods of time. And they're not the people themselves, although the people may identify with them and believe that in those things. It was a very magical time when I look back on it now. I do feel quite proud of myself at some level, not at an ego level, but just of how I managed to maintain a gracious exit as much as I possibly could. If you're finishing something in a relationship with someone, the cleaner you can make it, the more gracious, the more you can, you don't want any tangles left. If I'm advising a friend who's in that situation, I would always advise just give it to them. Give them as much as you possibly can. Give them more than you want to give them. And it will never probably be enough, but it's sort of you will never regret the generosity, that energetic, because there's often that feeling of wanting to hold on to things and, at the end of relationships. And that's a very useful thing to know. And if you can forgive, if there's anything that needs to be forgiven, and you don't even need to say that forgiveness. Sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it isn't. If you've finished it inside yourself, you've kind of come to a compassionate closure. Compassionate closure is so important, because then it doesn't follow you into your next relationship or your next situation. There's a lot of the part of the teachings in the Gene Keys, particularly what's called the Venus sequence, which is all about relationships.
How can you explain what the Gene Keys is for our friends listening that still sounds a little bit mysterious?
Yeah. It's got so many elements. As I said, it's like a labyrinth. The way that I often introduce it to people is through its most popular aspect, which is called the profile, the Gene Keys profile, which you go on the website genekeys.com and you can get your free profile. You put in your birth data, so it's got an astrological component. That profile that you get gives you a map and a journey that you can move through in terms of, it's a transformational journey. So you need what I call the map, the compass, and the journey itself, the guidebook. And so the Gene Keys book is kind of like the map that's got all the codes in it, big book. And then the compass is like the profile, because it orients you. This is going to be your awakening journey, and it's unique to each one of us. And it's a journey of contemplating your specific Gene Keys and how they will help you awaken. And each Gene Key is a transformational journey. It consists of 3 layers: the shadow, and then the gift, and then what's called the siddhi, which is like the divine gift, which you could look as seed, flower, and fruit. So the shadow is the seed. So Gene Keys it starts with dealing with difficult energies, and it's a transformational journey. So you look at your shadow, specific to you, and then you contemplate that, and you look at that in your life. You look at how it plays out, and then you begin to loosen up your opinions and your views around yourself, and you're more forgiving and gentle with yourself and others over a period of time. And that loosens that shadow kind of seed, and then it starts to sprout into its gifts. And there are word codes that you follow. And, so when I always say, because it's the simplest, and one of the simplest is the seed of conflict, which is the 6th Gene Key, there are 64, if that one relates to you, then your journey would be like conflict is a window, is a doorway for you to open up. So you have to really understand conflict in your life, wherever it shows up, inner or outer, and realize it's a gift and it has a gift in it. And that gift is diplomacy. So conflict teaches you how to yield and how to surrender and how to open and how to be firm with boundaries and all those things in relationships. It's teaching you a whole set of skills of empathy and listening and self-love and forgiveness and all those things that come with the package of learning how to communicate in a better and more gracious way in all your relationships. And it teaches you that. And then ultimately the fruit, because that's the flower, is diplomacy. And then the fruit is peace. So when you've perfected the art of diplomacy, you create peace, because you now know in your cells of your body that peace was there all the way from the beginning. It was actually in the shadow itself. Conflict contains the peace. The seed contains the fruit, and the fruit contains the seed. That's the journey. And then you follow these keys in sequences through your profile. And that's a whole long journey, because the keys take you on these different journeys. The first one is called purpose. It's like, what is the purpose of my life? And that sequence of gene keys helps you embody your true purpose. And then the second one's partnership and relationship. It's called the Venus sequence. It's about love. And those sequence of keys helps you unpick your own childhood wounding patterns around your heart and open up into states of love and forgiveness and whatever your siddhis and gifts are and whatever your shadows are. And you'll see your primary shadow patterns that govern your relationships. And it really does work, and they're very accurate. And then the third one is prosperity, is that prosperity flowers once the heart is open, once you've done the healing of the childhood wounding. Then true prosperity begins to blossom all around you in lots of different ways, because you then open up through the heart to the quantum field of your true destiny, your true dharma. Magic and synchronicity start to occur that show this higher purpose and how it fits with many other people's higher purpose. And that's a whole journey. That's the most popular part of the gene keys. And there are other parts as well that run into the synthesis, because it's a synthesis. So there are more mystical pathways. There are a shamanic pathway I'm working on at the moment. There are lots of different ways of moving into the labyrinth. In essence, I guess the gene keys is like a mystery school. And we don't really have mystery schools so much these days, but a mystery school is something it's like a university, but a university of higher consciousness. And so you come in to the university or the mystery school, and then you find your way through the labyrinth, whichever way you want to go. And you explore this teaching and then that teaching, and then you move on to another level and another level. And you're inside this body of wisdom that's reflecting your own wisdom back to you through the process. And along the way, you're probably meeting other people who are doing similar pathways, and you're crossing destinies and sharing the teachings and how they're affecting you. And I've set it up in a very different way from other teachings that I've been involved in, because it's self-teaching, it's self-illumination. I call it the journey of self-illumination, because it opens up from inside you. And the external teachings are just a sort of scaffolding that allow this inner building, this inner thing to take place. So you follow your intuition through the teachings and the synthesis. Yeah, that can be very magical. At the beginning also, it can be a little bit overwhelming, because there are so many layers. It's a multidimensional wisdom school. So there are kind of layers that go at a very high spiritual level. There are very simple, accessible layers. There are human relationship layers. There are healing layers. There are layers to do with the body, and there are layers to do with astrology and all kinds of different things. As I said, it's a jigsaw puzzle, and I'm still filling in the pieces, and people are also helping me fill in their pieces as well. So we're all kind of creating this sculpture together. But in that sense, it's a bit different from most things out there. And in the beginning, when you come in, you don't really know what you're into, because it's probably not something you've experienced before. Like, for instance, last night I'm doing a virtual retreat at the moment with, a few thousand people around the globe. And we did the Q&A session last night. So people come in with a lot of questions. There's a lot of beginners, and they have all these questions about the gene keys and how it works and all of that. And after a while, all those questions kind of just dissipate, because you realize they're not the point, because the answers come from inside you. And those sort of technical questions are not what it's about, because it's a magical system in that way. And once the awakening process starts to occur inside you, you realize it's more of a game. So in a way, what we're doing more and more now is gamifying it so that it is more responsive. We're using internet tools and things to make it more playful so that you can find your own way. And next year we'll be doing a lot more of that with apps and oracles and things that make it more mysterious and more intuitive.
And actually maybe a bit less like overwhelming, because there's a lot, right? And so then if you're only kind of being shown the next bit.
Yeah, exactly.
That offers
one thread at a time.
A simpler pathway.
Yeah. Now, I'll give people the option, but one of my goals is to have an oracle that chooses for you where and when to go. An online oracle that you can just say, okay, I've done this one, I'm ready for the next teaching. It's like you just click the oracle, and the oracle just goes through a process and says, try this. And it's completely random, if you believe, that random is random. And it gives you the next layer of teaching perfect suited to you. But the other, obviously you can choose your own way as well. That could be the most beautiful and powerful way of moving through the wisdom, because that was how the original I Ching was always created. Like it was an oracle. And then you're asking the universe to choose. So it's not your responsibility.
Yeah. And it can then be current to whatever is in you, in your energy in that moment.
Yeah. And also, like, if there could be other things that we build in where if your biggest question at the moment is your relationships, then there are clear relationship tools that would be good for you to go into. And that's another way you could access all the tools.
And can you share a bit around, I guess, the relationship between like all of this information and all these tools and then letting them go?
Well, that's why in Q&A sessions, that's really the most common answer I will give is not to take this seriously and to allow the teachings to just have their game and their way inside you. In a way, it's more about, it's more about meeting people than anything else. If you meet people on the same wavelength as you, those friendships that develop can be magical. And then you have something in common. So in a way, the synthesis, the teaching is just an excuse to experience love and connection and adventure. Of course, not everyone uses it that way. And some people just are very solo. And that's also wonderful because, they need that for themselves, for self-empowerment. But yeah, I'm always reminding people, let it be a game. So the more elements there are to the synthesis and the more we gamify it, the more obvious that truth is. Life itself is a game. Even though there's intense suffering, that knowing underneath that we're eternal means that we can approach life in a completely different way. And that's really the essence of the teaching. It's never about the teaching itself. It's about that truth, those immortal truths of love and physical embodiment and presence. In that sense, it's a very timely teaching because it doesn't take itself seriously. Neither do I.
Tell me more about like that in kind of in terms of timeliness. Why do we need more playfulness in these times?
Well, I think we've also, I think in terms of our spirituality, we've reached a kind of turning point. We have some great spiritual traditions, and yet ancient spiritual traditions and lineages kind of go out of date. And And the further they are from the source, or the source is, the more they kind of date. So in a way, it's a great time for stretching them to their limit and bringing some playfulness inside them, and also synthesizing them. And that's always been a little bit risky, because a lot of the great teachers have said, don't mix the streams, don't mix the lineages. And yet we are coming to a time of synthesis. We are in the time of synthesis. Our science, our everything, the world itself is seeing itself as one. We're kind of preparing for a different age, I think, a different epoch. And that will potentially be the age of synthesis coming. And so we have to see where all these lineages come from at their source, and therefore how they weave together. And it doesn't mean we have to try and fit one teaching into another, because that can be a mistake, I think. So you might take like the chakras and the teaching of the Vedanta and try and mix it with the Kabbalah, for example. And that doesn't always work. I mean, there's always overlaps and it's interesting, but it's not about that. It's about seeing how the different threads work inside us, because they work inside us in the same way or in similar ways. We can play with them and stretch them. And in a way, Gene Keys does that. It plays with them in different ways, but it doesn't have a dogma to it. There's no correct way. There's no answers from the master. There's none of that. Yeah, it's a living field. And so that sense of play is needed, serious play, actually, to stretch some of the old ways and to kind of challenge them, not in a kind of skeptical way, in a respectful way. Like one of the things I've been challenging this year, especially, is the notion of reincarnation, which I'm really interested in, and rebirth and the continuation of rebirth. My challenge is to all the teachers that don't discuss that, that avoid it, which I understand, but I understand why a lot of these kind of modern teachers, that would avoid that subject, because it could be distracting and it could take you away from living in the now and all those sorts of things. But actually, I think it's a very powerful teaching to really understand, because it has the capacity to break our fear of death. There's actually a huge body of evidence, of scientific evidence now for reincarnation. There's a lot of empirical data of children who remember their previous lives. And there's a lot of collected data around that. And that cannot be dismissed by even the most scientific mind. You're going to have to come up with another explanation for all this data. I'm not interested in proving, because that's never been my journey, and I'm not a scientist. But I just feel like these are things that we need to be discussing, because they're rich and they're ancient, and yet there's all kinds of old concepts around them. And so we need fresh perspectives. Yeah, so things like that, I think, are really valuable. And sexuality and some more edgy subjects. I mean, there have been spiritual teachers, there still are, who explore spirituality and sexuality, but also there are many other things like family life and spirituality, not really being discussed by many teachers. And most of the teachers we have not been in families and kept long relationships. And many of them are men. We need like new ideas. And I'm really up for that. And yeah, I'm an explorer in that way.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's really where like the essence of my questions around the courage come from, because I've experienced that in myself many times, where teachers or books or wisdom or things that I learn in spiritual community are really, really helpful. But what I experience in myself, which is it's present, it's here, it's now, it's in this moment, and it's in a reciprocal relationship with like everything that's been before and everything that's coming and what's here now. And that information is often different to what one's being told. And so we've also never lived like this before, where we're so mixed in race, in countries, in identities, in communication, in the amount of information and differing types of information that's around and available. It feels to me that to have those skills of being able to really anchor into a sense of what's true for, I can only understand what's true in my body, for me, in my soul, and I can share from that place. And that's the most powerful thing that I have to share. That might resonate for someone and not for someone else. And that's all totally great. But yeah, just this feels to me like it is just a time that we all need to develop that sophistication and that freedom in order to allow ourselves to really respectfully learn from the traditions, from our culture, from what's gone before, and to be able to listen into the future. I love the example of reincarnation. I mean, for me, that's not like a controversial concept, because that's my cultural concept that I had some very clear ideas about when I was a child. And I had this experience, as I was watching my father die, there was a week of actually watching him die. And this thing that you're saying about the fear of death, but more than that, it was like I was able to experience almost like the sensation of his life flashing before his eyes. I was able to experience it flashing before my eyes, but I was also able to experience a sense of the bigger aspect of his soul. And what was really powerful is we have so many cultural notions of what a good life is. And if you lived well, if you were successful, and they're by these kind of metrics often that are so tiny. Where did you live? How much money did you make? Whether you were married for how many years, doesn't matter the quality of the marriage, but it's it's all of these kinds of things, what your children went on to do, that kind of thing. And I really had this very powerful experience of that embodied realization that we've all come here with such different circumstances in this life and such different kind of quests, and that actually this cultural leaning of all kind of going in this one direction could take us so far away from that we might have a life that looks perfect, but then when we get to that moment of reckoning, it might be like, I missed it, and that felt really it felt so powerful for me, and it gave me a deeper sense, another layer lifted of that real courage to trust and follow that intuitive inner information, to not be afraid to live a life that doesn't look anything like one that I've seen before, to know that it's how I am responding and evolving through whatever the material of my life is that determines that end point of this life, and that it's part of a much bigger picture than just, Amisha. And and that for me, I find it so powerful, and it makes everything feel much more playful.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for you, when, I hope that you do have children one day, because I know that's something you would like, but you will then open up a whole new arena of how do you apply spiritual teachings into this sphere, into this realm? And, and you have to do that day by day and figure it out as you go along. And then you can communicate that on to others who are following. That's a great example of how the spiritual teachings need to come back down into the earth, into everyday life and reality, so that they can be made really practical. Then we can sing out with them, and more people can kind of partake of them and get the benefit of them. So I totally agree.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say thank you, because that's part of the reason why I can feel that yearning in my body. It's great being somebody that's very free and is able to do whatever one wants and get to spend time in quiet places and all of that, but it's a bit boring.
Yeah.
And I feel like I want the next level of the game. I want to I want to work out how to live in deep connection with everything that I've learned to this point in an environment where the stakes are different, where there's, other people's lives involved, where there's chaos, where there's things that I can't control, all of that. And where there's that sense of love and the letting go of control. For me, it feels like my spiritual journey it steers me closer to that yearning rather than away from it.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, this is where we need to apply the kind of wild spiritual teachings to everyday life, to that, I'm in the process of applying it to business, so I'm involved in this kind of Gene Keys business side of it, and I have a lot of skilled people who have a lot more business skill than I do. And yet I've been drawn to kind of master aspects of that for myself because I didn't know much about it. But I realized actually a lot of it's common sense and natural wisdom, like to know how to grow a business and grow the family of people in a business. Listen to them all. It's like a bigger family. Listen to them, learn from them, include everything, like try and bring those teachings to earth in a kind of environment where that's not really been used to having those kind of values. Yeah, it's an edge. Relationships is an edge. Business and money is an edge for spirituality. Sexuality is an edge. There are lots of edges in all kinds of areas. It's a very rich time in that sense. We've got to bring this spiritual teaching down into the form. And we've got to bring it into the earth, into the way we treat each other and the earth itself, and into our communities and all of that stuff. Yeah, it's rich time.
What else do you see this time being about?
I was going to say preparation. I have a strong intuition, and it also is embedded in the Gene Keys teachings because there's a prophecy that kind of like runs like this seam through the middle of Gene Keys, that we're coming into a time of massive transition of our whole planet and the species itself. We have this notion that evolution is kind of a straight line. We're moving in this certain direction and we can make plans according to where we've come from. That's the assumption. Like you look ahead and you think, well, I can more or less see maybe where it might go. And, and you have this like, oh yeah, we're going to have robot technology, then we're going to have this, and then we're going to solve these whatever problems, or you could take a negative view as well. But what we often don't see coming, well, we can't ever see it coming, is like a seismic shift, like a quantum leap. And because we never want to see that coming. Well, there's always the apocalyptic people. That's embedded in my teachings. It's a time of preparing for a big shift. And so I believe that the Gene Keys and my teachings and my work is part of that preparation, and that many others are receiving also part of their preparation of the bigger jigsaw puzzle, so that we can imbue that new awareness into our children, into the future generations, so that they have this solidity, so that they can pass that on to their children. And then collectively, these future generations can handle potential chaos that might be coming to the planet. Because all the indications and the science, and again, I'm not a scientist, but I know, I follow science, and I have friends who are scientists and environmental scientists. And all the indications are that the Earth is reaching a tipping point. That at the moment we're in this sort of, sitting on the porch, looking at the sun over there, and there's a tornado coming behind us, and we're not aware of it. It's not denial because we don't know it's coming. It's just a calm before the storm. And I'm not being negative either, because I think it's a time of great, transition and hope and beauty that's coming. But in order for the new beauty on the inside to be born, there's a universal law that kind of says the old form has to decay. It's always the way. It's always been the way with every great, if you look at the fall of the Roman Empire, I'm a student of history. I love history. And as the Roman Empire reached its final stages, you see extremes coming up a lot. You see extreme leaders coming to the top. These are the indicators of decay of the form. You can imagine perhaps being a Roman or being anyone, or you could be a Briton or a Celt or in that time, and the empire being so efficient and organized and connected, and just like it felt like it was going to last forever. How could there be anything else but this? And yet, in the core of it, it started to decay. The values and the principles started to decay. And then the whole thing started to fall apart. And then you end up in a different, history changes. There might have been instances in which it seemed like it was going backwards, but it didn't go backwards. There was probably times towards the end where it did get frightening. I'm sure it was incredibly frightening, because the structure that had held everything together in an organized pattern started to fall apart. And we're very similar, but it's more global. So everything's much bigger. The implications are bigger, and we have this environmental addition that could potentially trigger. It already is triggering things that people are not willing to admit. Pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that have come my way, friends I've made in specific places, just deliver the clues. I've been helping out with refugees for some time in Greece, since I traveled there some years ago to a big refugee camp and saw for myself what was happening. And so I now help out, my business helps out this small operation grassroots group who are doing an amazing job of like relocating refugees. They're mostly lawyers, actually, and they help refugees filling out all the very complex forms so that they can get rehomed. And it's quite a boring thing, but it's one of the most important grassroots groups out there, and they're independent, they're free, and I'm one of their funders. And they're called MIT, Mobile Info Team. They're tiny, but if anyone wants to donate to them, I'm sure they'd be absolutely thrilled. And anyway, it's an example of when I speak to them and I say, what's it like on the ground? Tell me some of the stories, tell me what's going on. And where are all these refugees coming from? And so, a lot of the refugees now moving up are from sub-Saharan African countries. And I say, and I just ask questions, like simple questions, like, why are they coming? And the answer that he gave me, he said, a lot of them are climate refugees. He said, but no one is allowed to use that term. No government is using that term because no one wants to admit that that's the case. But more and more of them are pouring in every day. And it's because the farmland is being parched and they can't grow food, or there's flooding, or there's extremes. It's not all because of war, which is what we assume. And a lot of it is, but a lot of it is because the heat of the climate is moving further north. It's edging further north. And so it's pushing refugees further and further north, and it's pushing conflicts further and further north. It's quite a thing that's happening on this planet that we're not seeing, really. And then we have the addition, obviously, of this time we're living in and the potential economic slide that we're probably going into. Well, we're definitely going into. It's a time of preparation. A long-winded answer. We're here to prepare for a new epoch. We have to be calm, we have to find places inside ourselves so we can handle it and our children can handle it. We kind of probably have to end this where we began, which is with intuition. If you really are in touch with your intuition, you will know how to act, when to act, who to connect with, when to move on, all of those really important survival-based decisions, thriving-based decisions that are needed and will be needed more and more. And an underlying spiritual trust in the process itself, in the bigger picture, that this is part of a kind of global process, a universal cosmic process that occurs to all systems and is occurring to all systems, because anytime something goes through a big change, everything goes through a big change. So because everything's entangled in this universe. So we're not alone in this shift. It's connected from the lowest life forms to the highest, higher dimensional life forms we can't even perceive yet. Everything is involved in it. And it's a kind of reaching a choke point. So it's an incredible time to be alive. I can see why people would be afraid, and that fear is understandable. And yet it's also a time of extraordinary possibility.
Thank you. That is a beautiful place to leave us, for us to land with this conversation.
Yeah. And I think you're right. The beautiful future.
Well, I don't know if I'm right or not, but I'm making an invitation. at least for us to enjoy the process.
Yeah. We have to engage our passion in dealing with whatever area we can deal with. Many of us have to be warriors and fight for truth, for justice, for the earth. She's earned that. Even if it's all kind of gonna fall apart for a bit, that doesn't mean we sit back and do nothing. We have to also kind of engage that warrior spirit, stand up for what's right. I'll finish with the one question that I always ask everyone in my retreats, which is, ask yourself this question: what is the very highest purpose? What is the most I can do for the whole during this lifetime? You have to just keep asking yourself that question and then live the answer.
Beautiful. Thank you, Richard.
It's a pleasure, Amisha.
If people want to get in touch, they basically just go to genekeys.com and they can find everything there.
Yeah, come and join the party at genekeys.com. Join the Pulse. The Pulse is my weekly, it's just like subscribe to this mailing list, but it's more than a mailing list. It's a pulse. We send out a gene key every 5 days that is governing the gene key that's governing the planet right now, its shadow and its gift and its city. And with that comes the latest thing that's coming out, the thing we're working on, some inspiration, that kind of thing. It's free, obviously, and it's just simple, and it connects you into this global rhythm. It's really nice. I use YouTube a lot. It seems to be my thing.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question: how will you create beauty in the world?